Ethan's flight had arrived hours later than scheduled, and the only sound welcoming him home was the low hum of the refrigerator. Dropping his suitcase in the hallway, he felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him as he made his way into the living room. The dim glow of a lamp revealed an unusual sight: two half-empty wine glasses resting on the coffee table, their stems faintly marked with fingerprints. A lingering scent of cologne hung in the air, not his, but sharp and unfamiliar. His brow furrowed as unease began to settle in. Natalie, his wife of 6 years, was always meticulous about keeping everything in order. She would never leave such a mess, especially knowing he was due home tonight. Something felt off. As he turned to head upstairs, muffled voices stopped him in his tracks. Following the sound, he paused outside the bedroom door, his heart thudding in his chest. Natalie was on the phone, her voice low but firm. "Mom, calm down. Everything is under control. Ryan left hours ago. Ethan won't suspect a thing," she said, her tone dripping with confidence. Ethan's stomach twisted as he leaned against the wall, her words cutting through him like blades. His wife wasn't merely hiding something. She was orchestrating it. Frozen in place, Ethan struggled to process what he'd just overheard. The name Ryan stood out, but the implications of Natalie's hushed conversation with her mother suggested something far more complex. This wasn't just about her. It was about Victoria too. Whatever was going on, it was clear that the whole family was involved, both figuratively and literally. Taking a steadying breath, Ethan straightened and entered the room, feigning ignorance. Natalie sat cross-legged on the bed, her phone casually tossed beside her. Her face lit up with a practiced smile, warm and inviting as though everything was perfectly normal. "Hey, babe," she greeted him, her voice balancing surprise and affection with precision. "I didn't expect you this late. How was the trip?" Ethan studied her closely, noting the slight disarray of her hair and the faint traces of nervous energy she masked with ease. "It was fine. Exhausting, but I'm glad to be home," he replied, leaning in to kiss her. Her lips met his, but there was a hesitation, a momentary pause, as though she were calculating her response. "Did you eat? I can heat something up for you," Natalie offered abruptly, standing with a little too much eagerness. "No need," Ethan said, his eyes following her movements. "I'll just grab some water." As she headed downstairs, Ethan seized the opportunity to take a closer look around. Now that he was paying attention, subtle signs stood out everywhere. A crumpled blanket lay at the foot of the bed. The sheets on one side were faintly wrinkled. It wasn't definitive proof, but the picture it painted left him deeply unsettled. In the kitchen, Natalie busied herself rinsing the wine glasses, humming a light tune as though nothing were amiss. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Late-night wine?" he asked, his tone casual. Natalie flinched almost imperceptibly before turning to face him. "Oh yeah, I had a glass with Mom earlier." She stopped by to chat for a bit. Her explanation was smooth, but Ethan caught the faint tremor in her voice. "That's nice. What did you two talk about?" Natalie smiled, tilting her head as if recalling a pleasant memory. "Oh, just catching up, you know. She's been a little stressed lately with Dad's work schedule and all." "Right," Ethan said evenly, stepping closer to the sink. He watched her carefully, noting the slight tension in her posture as he drew near. "Funny thing, I thought I caught a whiff of cologne earlier. Doesn't really seem like something your mom would wear." Natalie laughed, the sound too bright to be natural. "Oh, that must have been from the dry cleaning bag she brought over. You know how they use those scented chemicals sometimes." Ethan nodded slowly, letting her think she had smoothed things over, but his mind was already calculating his next steps. He wasn't impulsive. He valued clarity and certainty. That night, as they lay in bed, Natalie fell asleep quickly, her breathing steady and calm. Ethan, however, stared at the ceiling, wide awake. If she believed she had convinced him, she was sorely mistaken. The game had only just begun, and Ethan was determined to play it better than she ever could. The next morning, Ethan rose early, the house still wrapped in the quiet of dawn. Natalie stirred but didn't wake as he slipped out of bed. Today, he would begin piecing together the truth one calculated step at a time. His first stop was the living room. Although Natalie had rinsed the wine glasses, he noticed one was still damp, forgotten in her haste. He picked it up, studying the faint lip print on the rim. The shade of lipstick was darker than Natalie's usual choice. His jaw tightened. The faint scent of cologne from the night before had nearly faded, but the memory of it was vivid. Moving to the couch, Ethan lifted a cushion. Beneath it, he discovered a business card with the name, Ryan Peterson, embossed in bold letters. Beneath the name were a phone number and a company logo. Ethan's fingers tightened around the card as Natalie's conversation with her mother echoed in his mind. Although his stomach churned, Ethan forced himself to stay composed. Years of business negotiations had taught him the value of patience. He wouldn't confront her with half-formed suspicions. He needed undeniable proof. In the kitchen trash bin, he dug through layers of discarded scraps until he found a crumpled receipt. The items listed were from a high-end restaurant he and Natalie had never visited together. The date and time matched one of the nights he had been away. The evidence was stacking up, but it was still circumstantial. He retreated to his office and accessed the smart doorbell security footage. While it didn't capture the entire house, it showed who came and went. Fast-forwarding through the recordings, Ethan's pulse quickened as Natalie appeared, opening the door 2 nights ago. She wore a sleek, low-cut dress he didn't recognize. Moments later, a man stepped into view. Tall, confident, and familiar. Ryan Peterson. Ethan watched as Natalie welcomed him inside, glancing over her shoulder before shutting the door. His jaw clenched. This was the confirmation he had dreaded, but it was what he needed. Still, one question lingered. What role did her mother play in all this? Turning his attention back to the business card, Ethan picked up his phone and dialed the number, carefully masking his caller ID. A man's voice answered, smooth and self-assured. Brian Peterson speaking. Ethan remained silent, studying the voice. After a few seconds, he hung up, but that brief exchange was enough to confirm his suspicion. This was the man who had been in his home with his wife. The weight of betrayal now became undeniable, and the realization that Natalie and Victoria were in this together made it all the more damning. Ethan's lips curled into a cold smile. They thought they were clever, but they had underestimated him. It was time for him to act. Over the following days, Ethan carefully laid the groundwork for his plan with meticulous precision. He knew Natalie and Victoria would continue to misjudge him, and he intended to turn that to his advantage. Every interaction with Natalie became a test of his self-control. While she pretended that everything was normal, Ethan played along, watching her every move with quiet intensity. One evening, when Natalie left for what she claimed was a yoga class, Ethan decided it was time to dig deeper. He accessed their shared phone plan, something she likely hadn't given a second thought. Her recent call and text logs painted a clear picture, frequent conversations with her mother, as well as exchanges with Ryan. Many messages had been deleted, but enough remained to reveal flirtations and plans to meet. Shifting his focus, Ethan turned his attention to Victoria. Under the pretense of helping her with a household problem, he arranged a visit. Victoria greeted him with her usual charm, though Ethan noticed a faint tension beneath the surface. She offered him coffee, chatting about her husband's upcoming work trip and how she planned to keep herself busy in his absence. As they talked, Ethan's eyes scanned the room. A silk scarf draped over a chair caught his attention. It carried a faint trace of a familiar cologne. Nearby, an open planner rested on the counter. When Victoria briefly stepped away, Ethan leaned in for a closer look. One entry stood out, lunch with Ryan. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. Ryan wasn't just connected to Natalie, he had ties to Victoria as well. Ethan's suspicions deepened, but he maintained his friendly demeanor, even helping Victoria fix a squeaky door before he left. Back home, Ethan continued his preparations. He backed up the security footage from the doorbell camera and organized all the receipts, messages, and other incriminating evidence he had gathered. Creating a private email account, he sent copies of everything to himself for safekeeping. His goal wasn't just to confront Natalie's betrayal, but to unravel the web of lies she and her mother had spun. Ethan also began planting seeds of doubt with Victor, his father-in-law. Under the guise of casual family conversations, he gently steered their talks toward Victoria's unusual behavior. "I noticed Victoria's been making a lot of trips to the city lately," Ethan remarked during one call. "She seems busier than usual. Everything okay with her?" Victor hesitated before answering, his tone uncertain. "She says it's just errands. But now that you mention it, she has been acting differently." Ethan didn't push further. He knew Victor needed to uncover the truth on his own. Meanwhile, he continued to keep Natalie close, suggesting date nights and weekend plans. She seemed relieved by his apparent ignorance, falling back into her routine without suspecting a thing. But Ethan was far from finished. The day he had meticulously planned for finally arrived. Waiting for Victor to leave town on a work trip, Ethan seized the opportunity to dismantle the lies both Natalie and Victoria had been weaving. He began with an email to Victor, attaching the security footage, receipts, and records of Victoria's meetings with Ryan. The subject line was direct: "You deserve the truth." In the email, Ethan outlined everything he had discovered: Victoria's affair, her manipulation of Natalie, and their coordinated deception. He ended the message with a single line: "You deserve better than this." Next, Ethan confronted Natalie. When she returned home from one of her supposed yoga classes, she found him waiting in the living room, his laptop open and the incriminating evidence displayed on the screen. "Sit down," he said, his tone calm but icy. Natalie froze, her keys dangling in her hand. "What's going on?" Ethan's gaze was unyielding. "You tell me. Maybe you can explain why Ryan was in my house while I was gone. Or why you've been helping your mother cover up her own affair." Her face drained of color, and she stammered, "Ethan, it's not what you think." "Don't insult me with more lies," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "I've seen the messages, the footage, the receipts. I know everything." Tears filled Natalie's eyes as her composure crumbled. "Ethan, I was trying to protect Mom. She begged me to help her, and I didn't know how to say no. Please, you have to understand." "What I understand," Ethan replied coldly, "is that you didn't hesitate to betray me in the process. You chose deceit over honesty, manipulation over trust." When Natalie reached for him, he stepped back, his expression unmoving. "We're done, Natalie. You and your mother made your choices. Now you'll face the consequences." Leaving the room, Ethan ignored her sobs. He felt no pity. The final step of his plan came the next morning. Ethan sent an anonymous tip to Ryan's employer, attaching evidence of his unethical behavior. Within days, Ryan was jobless and publicly disgraced, his arrogance shattered. Victor's response to Ethan's email arrived later that day, a single text message that read, "Thank you for telling me. I'll handle the rest." That evening, Ethan packed his belongings, leaving behind the home he had once cherished. As he closed the door behind him, a profound sense of release washed over him. Natalie and Victoria were left to deal with the wreckage of their choices. Driving away, Ethan reflected on the ordeal. Once, he had loved Natalie deeply, but her betrayal had destroyed that bond. Now, all that remained was a man who had reclaimed control of his life and ensured that justice was served. As the city skyline disappeared in his rearview mirror, Ethan felt a quiet, triumphant peace. The past was behind him, and the future was his to shape.